Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow tech enthusiasts, today we have at adfartech Venture podcast a very great pleasure that I welcome you all to today's event. We have the distinct honor of hosting a prominent figure in the tech industry, someone whose expertise and insights have greatly influenced the ever-evolving landscape of technology and recruitment. So, our guest today is none other than the Simon Rodwell, a seasoned IT professional whose career spans a diverse range of technical spaces and leadership roles. From his beginning as an individual contributor to managing teams of various engineers, Simon has consistently demonstrated a deep understanding of intricacies of technology and the art of building scalable systems. And nowadays, as a fractional CTO based in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, Simon brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this table. So, throughout his career, Simon has navigated the ever evolving landscape of a tech recruitment with the fineness, adapting to new trends, embracing diversity and inclusions, and championing innovations every step of the way. So, without further ado, please join me in extending a warm welcome to Simon Rodwell. And Simon, thank you so much for giving your time, your knowledge, and experience for this podcast. And before we go further and ask you something more in details, we would like to ask you for wonderful introductions by yourself, in your words, how you traveled this journey and how you reached to this space. So please, Simon, introduce yourself.
Hi, Sonal. Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. I feel very humbled by that. And I think you did a really, really great job. You've obviously really looked at my profile. So I kind of think like, oh, wow, what else is there to tell? But so, yes, I've been working in technology for over 20 years, and I have kind of shifted around between sort of growing from an engineer through to being a people leader, and then sometimes shifting back to being an engineer and then sort of a hands-on engineer, and then back to doing people management, because I really enjoy both of them. I have worked for a range of different types of companies, digital agencies. I've done a lot of work with startups, and then I've also worked with some big tech. I was very fortunate in having the opportunity to work at Amazon in their headquarters over in Seattle, US. And that was a really sort of formative experience for me, and really taught me a huge amount. So that was something that was really valuable for me. Particularly, it was an opportunity for me to really explore the world of recruiting and interviewing people with a lot of depth. So to elaborate on that, Amazon is obviously hiring a lot of engineers all the time, and they train people on how to effectively measure candidates to determine whether they would be a good fit for Amazon. And so I went through that process. And then beyond that, I actually applied for a program known as bar raisers. And so a bar raiser in Amazon can kind of be thought about as somebody that does a lot of interviewing. So they should be fairly good at it, but they're also very much responsible for understanding and facilitating the recruitment process. How do we interview candidates? How do we make sure that we have the right makeup of people that will be conducting the interview? When we debrief at the end of the interview, so you sort of discuss all of that information that each person has gathered during those interviews. How can you facilitate that discussion to make sure it's equitable and database, etc. So that really was an opportunity where I learned a heap about recruiting from Amazon, because I believe they do it very well. And I've since gone on and taken some of those learnings and applied them to different places that I've worked, to ensure that we really can get the highest standards in terms of our own processes, which will in turn enable us to attract and find the very best candidates.
That's a great, Simon. So it's, like a CTO with the all HR perspective, and mainly it's a kind of a people person, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy both aspects of being hands-on with the technology, but then also, yes, relating to people, understanding product, and very much mentoring and growing people. I think as a manager, that's the most enjoyable part of the job, when you can sort of get somebody up to the next level and promote them.
and that's the best beauty of the leadership skills that you have grown up. So thank you so much, Simon. It's, seems from your introductions and whatever you are doing, it's like you are not just helping the growth for the service related industries only, but you are also doing a growth for the people also. So that's a very great skills in the leadership.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful introductions as well as the job that you are doing. So, Simon, before proceeding further, if you give me also permission to introduce myself with my organization's name, please.
Sure. Yeah, go for it, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, as I said in the beginning also that I myself is a Sonal Shah, and as an adfartech venture, we are thrilled to have you first as the guest and have a word with you. So if I say quick word on the adfartech venture, as adfartech venture, we are IT and the tech platform and focus on the majority of the all kinds of IT solutions, IT resources, IT recruitments, and this kind of tech audio podcast. And we have a vendor alliances with the 50 plus tech partners. It includes SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, then Pega, OutSystem, Appian, Salesforce, Cloudera, Informatica, and many more also. And the key solutions, it includes ERP, application development, data, then AI, ML, blockchain, cloud, managed services, then UX, UI testing, and the cybersecurity also. And when I say recruitment and resource allocations, though we have a resources basis of 20,000 plus all across the scale. So we can provide onshore as well as offsite, onshore, both these solutions within the 24 hours. So that is the major skills which we have for the resource provisions. And at FAR, with these podcasts, we love to hear the views of different CTOs, different tech leaders, different industry owners to have, words with the industry leaders to know about what are the future of industry, what are the current trends, what are the current topics that are going hot in between the service industry as well as this tech industry. So we can be better prepared to serve them the better, as well as the fellow leaders can also learn something better with the tech profiles. So that is the main motto as well as the aim behind this podcast. And I hope you will also like to share much more about this tech industry, as you are also leading the very good experience in the tech. So this is all about me and my adfartech venture. And thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to have collaborations with you for all the future related requirements. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So much. So Simon, if you are ready, can we start the question and answer?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. And yes, I forgot to say thank you to our listeners as well as audience also, because of their curiosity, their eagerness, we are bringing the different topics, different CTOs on demands as well as on choice to this podcast platform. So thank you so much, audience, for giving us this opportunity as well as giving us the motto to run this podcast. So, Simon, my first question goes to you about adapting to remote work and distributed team. So, as we all know, like, after especially this pandemic, rise of remote work has been too much. So, how has your approach to recruiting and managing tech talents evolved to accommodate distributed teams? And what strategies have you found most effective in maintaining collaborations and productivity across the remote?
Yeah, it was definitely something that kind of shifted very suddenly, obviously with the rise of COVID, and then I've noticed that there's been a bit of a sort of return to either hybrid or sometimes in office work, but there still are some companies that are open to complete remote work. And if you think about it, they potentially have a fairly strong advantage, because when you're looking for talent, if you're either hybrid or on premise, then you're limited to the talent in your own city. But as soon as you go pure remote, then the whole world is your oyster in terms of finding talent. Obviously, can get difficult in terms of time zones, but even if you assume that you can go plus or minus 3 hours from the head office, and that's still a massive amount of talent that you have access to. So I think that teams that are able to really embrace the whole remote work have a really distinct advantage. That said, there are some drawbacks. It does make some things more difficult. I think we have to, for example, adapt to much more asynchronous work. So we can't necessarily easily have a conversation with somebody, a few desks over, etc. You don't have a whole lot of those impromptu opportunities to interact with people. And so I think we've seen a sort of shift towards a lot of the tools that support this kind of asynchronous behavior, various chat tools and issue management, all of which we used before. But I think there's been a much stronger reliance on these tools, and we have to really understand that. Another thing that I think becomes really important is the use of online documentation. So in previous cases, when perhaps somebody would do a presentation to present an idea, or they collaborate and they have these meetings to discuss things. I think if we can try and limit those kinds of things, those kinds of behaviors, and instead replace them with more heavily documented ideas. So, somebody goes away and they write sort of a 3 or 4 page document about their proposal so that people can then review it asynchronously. I think that enables a much more distributed team. The other thing that I think perhaps people forget about a little bit is culture. And so when we're all in an office together, we build a certain culture. People learn about each other's personal lives, and they perhaps build, a table tennis team or whatever. And, you have a lot of these informal and fun interactions. And so that sort of builds a bit of the culture of the company. And obviously some people may think, that's a nice to have, but is it really important for running an effective business? And my response to that is absolutely. It's actually really, really important from a business perspective. And the reason I say that is because when we build these bonds with each other, it's essentially a process of creating trust. And trust is very important for a high-functioning team, because in any team we're often required to give each other feedback. And sometimes that feedback is going to be negative. And giving negative feedback to somebody is really, really hard if you don't trust them and they don't trust you. It leads to sort of animosity and frustration. Versus if you actually really do trust the person, you trust their judgment and you like them, then you can sort of receive and give that negative feedback much more freely and much more frankly, knowing that it will be taken as constructive criticism, hopefully, and productive, as opposed to just sort of a negative dig against that person. And if you think that you don't need to give negative feedback, then perhaps consider the next time you're doing a code review. I think the whole purpose of a code review is to find potential faults or shortcomings in somebody else's work, and then provide this feedback about how they can make it better. And again, when you have that strong trust developed with somebody, that becomes a lot more easy. And so I guess following on from that, how do we replace those impromptu conversations that you might have at the water cooler, as they say, or at the table tennis table, wherever it may be? And one thing that I've seen done quite effectively is to basically latch on to startups. So in an office setting, a startup is designed to be very quick, right? You sort of stand up, and that's why you stand up, so that you can move everybody ahead really quickly. And so you try and get it done in like 10 minutes. But I actually believe that in a remote setting, you can actually go the other way. And what I've seen work really well is to actually spend the first 15, 20 minutes talking about something that is completely irrelevant to the company. So, you kick off your day with your stand-up and you start talking about what people did over the weekend, what movies they've watched, whatever it may be, whatever that group socially likes to talk about. And that kind of helps with that team bonding and building that culture, and therefore trust, so that you can work most effectively with your team. So I think those are a couple of the things that I can think about that can sort of ease this shift towards remote work and distributed teams.
Brilliant strategy you have adopted, and managing tech talents throughout the platforms as well as throughout the organizations. And the way you are saying all these, it shows that you do not have just only specific skills on managing the people, but you have perspective as well as the thinking of how different teams can be managed with the personal as well as organizational growth provisions feature as a bonus part. So that's a wonderful leaderships and truly inspiring in your each and every words that you and answers. Thank you so much, Simon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, Simon. So my next question is like you have very well said that you are managing all the kinds of teams. So when it comes to diversity and inclusions, so how does your organization prioritize diversity and inclusions in the tech recruitment practices? And what are the steps have you taken to ensure that your team has a diverse and inclusive workforce? So can you just give us a brief about that too, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is it's a really, really tricky topic for a number of reasons. But I think, as we know, historically, the tech world has been uh, somewhat dominated by male as opposed to female. And that's one type of diversity that we can look at. But there's actually a whole range of different diversity aspects that we can look at, whether it's neurodiverse, gender diverse, etc. Um, and for me, it's about trying to create a culture at the very beginning that is both diverse and inclusive. So, as an example of that, if you have an interview process that has maybe 3 rounds of interview, so you've got 3 different interviewers that are going to be conducting those interviews with that candidate, ensure that that panel of people is also diverse. Have a female interviewer in there to interview the candidate so that candidate can see that, okay, this is a diverse company. That's particularly valuable if the candidate themselves is diverse, because they can identify with perhaps the person that's conducting that interview. So that's one way that you can look at trying to encourage diversity, because I think that will make you a more attractive employer. And then I guess one of the other things is that, as I mentioned, diverse can mean a lot of different things, including something like neurodiversity. And, you will often see quite a lot of that in technology as well. You do have a very neurodiverse set of people that are sort of working in the industry. And we need to be understanding and respectful that, obviously these people work in very different ways and their energy levels can be different to us. Like, you can have introverted versus extroverted people. So everybody is going to be different. And so sometimes you may need to consider adapting your interview process to be more accommodating for people of, with neurodiversity. So an example of that is, sometimes a company will set up an interview process that has those 3 interviews back to back, 3 hours, 1 hour each, boom, boom, boom. Which some people love that. And they're like, all right, cool. I just want to get this over and done with. I got a lot of energy. Each time I interview with somebody, I'm going to get more excited and more, I'll be able to express myself clearly. And so some people will be like that. There'll also be a lot of people that will be completely drained after just 1 hour of interview, and they'll need a break. And so that break may be, a half-hour break in between interviews, or it could even be splitting the interviews across different days. That's actually one of the things that I think remote work has enabled, because we're often doing candidate interviews remotely as well. We can afford to split them across various days. Versus, I think, if I go back to the time when I was interviewing in Amazon, often we'd be flying the candidates in from all over the United States or even occasionally overseas, and we couldn't afford to put them up in a hotel for a week while we spread out our interviews. So instead, it was that kind of back-to-back experience, which was tough. And you could see that some candidates were really, really struggling with it. So trying to work out ways to adapt your interview processes so that you can meet the needs of the candidate. And it may sound a little bit like we're kind of, bending over backwards to make sure the candidates are comfortable. Good. Then you look like an awesome company. And so the candidate's more likely to accept your offer when it comes to that point. And I guess the other thing to remember is that, I have seen people go into an interview that they're conducting and they've been very kind of terse with a candidate and very clinical and somewhat almost unfriendly, because they wanted to make it difficult for the candidate, which, depending on the role, I can understand that. But for something like software engineering, I think that's completely unnecessary. You should be going the other way to make the candidate as comfortable as possible so that they can perform at their very best. So again, it all comes back to, creating that comfortable environment, that inclusive environment during that interview process to make sure that candidates of all walks of life feel sort of welcomed. And so, yeah, I think that's how I like to sort of approach diversity and inclusion in tech recruitment. And, it's not a problem that we're going to solve overnight, because I really believe that it's about a pipeline. It's about going back to schools and encouraging people of all walks of life to get involved in science, technology, engineering, and maths, and creating role models that they can look up to. And I think there are some great examples of that emerging, particularly in the US. There's the Grace Hopper Conference, which is awesome. So if you haven't heard of that, look it up. It's pretty cool. And so creating those role models so that young people become interested in engineering and technology and all of these things, so that they then go study it in university and they apply to jobs. And, and I do see it trending in the right direction. Absolutely. I think it's something that's going to take a long time and concerted effort over a long period. But for now, what you can do in your company is to ensure that the processes that you design are accommodating of people from all walks of life. So encouraging that diversity through your recruiting processes so that you can hopefully attract those candidates as well.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much, Simon, for emphasizing the importance of diversity as well as inclusions as per your perspective as a CTO. So this all shows you are very much committed to ensure, diverse and inclusive workforce, and the methodology that you have shows that, what should be the approach of the recruiting person as well as recruiting organizations. That shows you not just only, contributes to the success of the team, but it overall gives back your answer. So my next question, Simon, is about cultural fit recruitments. Many times the people needs the skills only. But as I had observed through this tech industry is if people are culturally fit, they can set in any of the organizations with, great adaptability as well as flexibility. So according to you, beyond technical skills, how do you assess this cultural fit during the recruitment process? And what are the specific qualities or values do you prioritize in potential candidates?
Yeah, great question. Another tricky one, because I think this is actually an area where we have to be very, very careful. And so I'm going to talk about two kind of concepts here that I'm sort of making up a little bit. But one is the social cultural fit, and one is the business cultural fit. So a social cultural fit might be whether the person feels sort of similar to the other people in the team. Like, let's say you have a team and on Friday for lunch, they're like going down to the pub and having lunch together. You may have a candidate that joins your team that doesn't drink beer and doesn't like eating outside because they want to save money, etc. So from a social perspective, they're perhaps not a cultural fit. But in terms of whether you should hire that candidate or not, it's completely irrelevant. And in fact, you should perhaps, you shouldn't even try to find out these things necessarily during the interview. So there's that social cultural fit, which I think you need to make sure that you ignore that in terms of hiring the right candidate for the role. And then if I switch over to the other side, which is the kind of business cultural fit, that's all about understanding how well this candidate will work within the culture of the business as opposed to the social culture of that team. So if you look at, and I'm not going to sort of suggest that there's any one thing that you should look for in that, because it really will differ per company. But often what you can see in companies is that sometimes they'll have published company values. At Amazon, they were known as leadership principles, and I think there's maybe like 13 or 14 of them now. But there were these kind of little snippets of language that then had a description that really helped you understand, like, what's the culture that we're striving for within this business, within this company. An example that I've seen is pretty common is like something like customer is king. or in Amazon, it was customer obsession. So, you really focus on making sure that we're always doing the right thing for the customer. So if you take that as something that is defining the culture of your company, usually there'll be more than just one. You might have, 5, 6, or like Amazon, 14 different sort of codes that define the culture. But if you take that as part of the culture of the company, you can actually design interview questions that revolve specifically around that kind of value that has been established. So an example for customer is king might be a question that says, tell me about a time that you went above and beyond for a customer. So that's obviously your leading question. You can follow up more questions, but you're driving to see how well that particular candidate aligns to your company value of customer is king. And when you do it from that approach, you will get very specific data about how they align in terms of a cultural fit for your company.
That's great. That's a great. So it's all about, connecting the employees' own values with the organization, as well as indwelling the organization's values to the employees. So it's a vice versa, as well as, helping the organizations to overall grow, not only in the, market shares or something like that, but building the brands also. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. And the way that you craft your questions is designed to specifically get data about that particular company value. So a way that I've seen it done very effectively is, if you have your 3 rounds of interview, you might have each person there target questions that focus on a particular cultural company value or leadership principle for that candidate. So, one person talks about customer is king. One person talks about, innovation, like innovation, if that was a company value that you have. The next person focuses really on innovation. Tell me about a new idea that you came up with and you sold it to your boss and then you were able to turn it into a product. So like you're really pushing for questions that drive to collect data about those particular company values, which again is a proxy for what that cultural fit is.
Yes, exactly. Very well said. Very well said. Thank you so much, Simon, for highlighting the various types of interviews that you had also experienced, as well as, you had aligned with your career span. So thank you so much for this wonderful and neatly crafted answers. So now, when adding on these answer only, not the question only, but the answer only, nowadays these employer brands and reputations are also, taking a major part in the recruitments. So how important is employer branding, and what strategies as a CTO you employ to build and maintain a positive employer brand? So how does organization differentiate itself to attract the top talents in the competitive tech?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a number of things that a company can do to make themselves an attractive employer. Unfortunately, the first one is to pay well. That can be expensive, but that people certainly, yeah. So, but you can choose where you want to pay in the market. You can be kind of middle of the ground. You can be in the top tenths, the top percentile, etc. But that will certainly help. But obviously it's expensive. And if that's the only thing that you have, then it's probably not going to work in the long run. So the next thing is to obviously make sure you're taking care of your current employees. If you're growing your team, people will speak to each other. And people, one of the best ways to recruit people is to say, who's somebody that that might be looking for a job? And you get these referrals. That's such an effective way of finding great talent. And so, but if you've created a miserable place to work for the current employees, they're not going to tell their friends to come and work for the same company. So ensuring that the talent that you have already is taken care of, because that will go out into the workforce and people will learn about that. So remuneration and taking care of your current employees is awesome. The other thing that I think is very important and often overlooked is a candidate's first impression. So if you think about what recruiting looks like, it's a numbers game. A recruiter will have 200 candidates apply. They need to sort through resumes and shortlist the top 20, and then you interview this many, etc., and so on. And I understand that that's very demanding in terms of time. But if you can work out processes that make that less time consuming so that you can get back to candidates much more quickly. So if you're taking a week to return to a candidate, or if they've done their first interview and it takes another week for you to get back, then that leaves a very negative impression for the candidate. And it also opens up opportunity for one of your competitors to hire that candidate instead. Particularly if somebody is actively looking for a new job, then you can assume that they're going to be interviewing for a number of different companies. And if your interview process takes 4 weeks because you're slow in that sort of SLA turnaround, then that means that you're potentially going to miss out because somebody else will get in there first, and it creates a really negative experience for the candidate. So making sure that you're prompt in your responses can really help. I once had a mentor who told me, like, Simon, if you're interested in business, you've got 24 hours to respond. If you take longer than that, that's sending a signal to your counterpart that you're not interested. Now, it's not always going to be possible to get a 24-hour turnaround in recruiting, because sometimes there's a lot of people involved. But if you can keep that as the kind of the North Star of what you should be targeting in terms of communication with the candidate, or even if you can't get back to them with an answer, say, hey, look, we haven't forgotten about you. We're doing this and this and this. We'll come back again, and so that they feel that they're being taken care of. I think that's really important in terms of creating an appropriate brand to attract potential employees.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Simon, for sharing your strategies for building and maintaining a positive employer brand. So, Simon, if I ask you one questions out of the syllabus that nowadays, according to you, what are the special skills, or I can say current tech trends that are in demand in terms of recruitments?
Oh, wow, that is a tricky one. I think it's funny. I actually see that it's a lot more fragmented, and so.
But nowadays, whenever you ask for any kind of a tech recruitments, there are the people who are a front end or who are a back end.
Yeah, that's what it used to be, right?
I'm asking, and throughout all of your answering to all my questions, I wondered that you had been to all kind of experiences in the terms of recruitment and resources.
Yeah.
So it's better to ask you, what are the preferred tech skills that people find interesting to have work with the kind of set of the people or set of the organizations that give
Yeah.
like these. So according to you, my this question is out of the syllabus, but
yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. So if I look at a lot of the trends that I've seen come up, a lot of roles will have mention of AI and large language models. That's something that's coming up a lot. But to learn how to use large language models and these sorts of things, it's actually pretty easy. At the end of the day, for the most part, you're interacting with an API. That's using these models, which is very different to building them from the ground up, which is, I imagine, very difficult. I've never tried it, and I don't think I ever will. But building them from the ground up is very different to using them. And often when I see these jobs advertised, they say, experience in AI and LLMs, etc. All they mean is, have you ever used the ChatGPT API? And you can find that out by having a conversation with them, like, oh yeah, we've got this tool and we just want to, experiment with this. I'm like, all right, cool. That's not hard. And so I guess if you're a candidate out there and you're looking for roles, and then you keep seeing this AI and LLM, and you're a little bit daunted by it because it's sophisticated and difficult technology, I guess don't be turned off by of the idea of applying for that role, because chances are the needs of the company are actually fairly simple. And so I have seen a lot of that. I guess the other thing to be aware of, and this is something that big tech does, like Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. They don't care what language you know. they use certain languages on their teams, but they don't care what you currently know. They hire great engineers, knowing that a great engineer will be able to pick up new, hard skills and learn new languages and frameworks, etc., without too much trouble. That's something that they can afford to do because they got lots of money and lots of time. But if you're a startup and you're hiring your first full-time engineer, you probably can't afford to retrain them in a new language or a new framework. So you have to be much more specific about what you need. So it is a challenge that these sort of less established companies will need to overcome, but it's not insurmountable.
So that's the best technology that, as per your perspective, as per your view, is the AI large language model.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to caveat that though, because what I yeah.
Nowadays are preferring to going for the AI as well as most of the nowadays I'm listening to also that AI ML and these different kinds of large language models, and some of the people are also
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I guess the caveat that I would put out there is for, people who are, engineers perhaps at earlier stages of their career. And it's kind of almost like a warning to say, look, don't go learn a technology just because somebody tells you that it's cool or it's in demand or these sorts of things. Because if that's your only motivation for learning that technology, then chances are you probably won't end up being awesome at it. You might learn a little bit and sort of understand how it works, etc. But if you're not really passionate about that particular technology, you're not going to love it and you're not going to really engross yourself, and you're probably not going to be as good at it. Instead, choose something that you really are passionate about, something that you wake up in the morning and you want to work on it, like your real job finishes, but then that night you're working on some side project that uses that technology because you love it. That's where you will be awesome. And that's where you can really compete and sort of outshine a whole lot of the other potential candidates. So be aware of the trends and by all means dabble. But if you're, after dabbling a little bit, you're sort of not really feeling it, maybe it's not for you.
And it's very exciting to hear about your forward thinking approach, not in line with the only technology, but overall, managing the people for their growth also, as well as organization growth, as I mentioned in many of the time throughout this podcast. So that's a wonderful perspective you have shared in each and every answers. So Simon, before I close this podcast with the question and answer sessions, I would like to add one more request to these questions. That if in a one line or a one word you want to summarize these all answers, what could be the best advice to the fellow people who wants to join organization, or as in organizations, if you want to give one advice to the employee, what would
we didn't end up touching on it too deeply, but I think one of the things that I've really learned over the years being involved so heavily with recruiting is to really look for ways to make sure that the data that you get from candidates is deep. So you will ask them their leading questions, and then you sort of really dig deep into their experience. What was the project about that you worked on? What was your role within the project? How long did the project run? What were the specific business goals that you were trying to achieve? How did you measure those, etc.? So you dig really deep into the past experience of the candidate, because that past experience is really what's going to drive their, that's the indicator for how they're going to perform within your organization. And when you have that really deep data, you're able to make a better decision, but it also enables you to get rid of kind of biases that you may have. So for example, if their style of communication didn't really match with what you liked, like, does that matter in the role? Like, who cares if they didn't give you as much eye contact as you particularly like? If you looked at the content and the data that you're able to gather through that interview process, that's what should be driving your decisions. And so constructing interview processes that really optimize gathering data and then training the interviewers to learn how to do that in a really effective way, that's super important in my opinion. And it will help you identify the very best candidates to ensure that you've got a really, really strong team.
Great, that's a great. So your thoughtful response to this question also provided us with a deeper understanding of the challenges as well as the opportunities that lies in the tech recruitments. So on behalf of adfartech venture as well as a personal thanks to you also, and sincerest gratitudes for joining this podcast and sharing your valuable insights for these tech recruitments. And we are really thankful to you for the wisdoms and the expertise and the perspective for each and every questions that you have shared with us. So thank you so much, Simon, for your generosity in sharing this all. And we are really honored to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you so much.
Forward for the possibility of the future collaborations as well as engagement. Yeah. Thank you, Simon.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Sonal.
Thank you. And dear audience, if you also enjoyed the discussions with the Simon Rodwell, you can directly follow him and learn from him what he is doing, how he is doing, and in case of any expertise or advice that you need, you can just follow him and have a conversation with him directly on the LinkedIn page with the Simon Rodwell. And if you want to know more about what are the other CTOs, CEOs, and founders is talking about the tech trends and the technologies, just go and follow the adfartech venture page for more details about the technology. So this is all about today's podcast, and I hope all you have enjoyed it a lot. And please follow this adfartech venture page to have more and more insights about the tech. So this is all about today's podcast, and I am the host of this show and signing off from this podcast. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Simon, for gracing us with your praises.
Thank you.